is from A Floating Life.
The Adventures of Li Bai, a novel based on China's great Tang Dynasty poet Li Bai, who lived in the 8th century A.D.
Shaking my head, I climbed down to Confucius and made my way towards the drum tower. Once there, I saw that the market was still bustling despite the hour, the square illuminated by 4-foot-high red lanterns hanging from the eaves of each of the shops. I tied Confucius to a bridle post and strolled into the square. All around, the voices of hawkers resonated in the clear evening air. Salted fish sellers, pie makers, vegetable sellers, rice wine brewers, poultry vendors with their geese, chicken and quail, all clamored for my attention. But my eyes sought only the pork stalls, and finding them within a few moments, they drew me straight to a brawny man standing on the pavement outside the biggest stall. He was surveying the crowds, occasionally shouting encouragement to the apprentices inside. For a moment, the sense I had been there before was so strong that a wave of dizziness swept over me. The same piggy features, the same close-set, calculating eyes that roamed through the crowds, the same bullying manner with his workers and unctuousness with his customers. This time, though, I was not a mendicant seeking employment. I shook my head to clear it, straightened my robe, and strode over to where he stood, assuming the arrogant air of servant from a large household. "Are you the butcher, Liang?" I demanded, standing over him, a string of cash dangling conspicuously from my right hand. "Yes, young master," he replied, simultaneously fingering a large mole on his cheek, from which a 4-inch tuft of hair sprouted, and leering at the money. "What can I do for you?" "I need a large order for a banquet my master is holding tomorrow. First, 5 catties of your best loin meat, minced as fine as you can. There mustn't be a speck of fat in it." "Certainly, sir," he replied, smirking at me, then turning his head to shout out the order. No, I interrupted him. "I don't want those clumsy clowns to do the chopping." A flash of irritation crossed his face, but then his eyes fell again on the string of cash, and his smile returned. "Of course, young sir, of course. I will attend to it myself." He levered his bulky frame up and made his way to one of the chopping boards, pushing aside a young boy who had been working there. For the next 20 minutes he stood there, mincing meat with the blade of a cleaver, a prickle of sweat appearing on his brow as he worked. Finally, when the mound of minced pork was 1.5 feet high, he laid down the chopper, called for wax paper, and wrapped the mincemeat in 2 packets, which he brought over to where I was standing. "Let me see," he said, handing me the packages. "That comes to... I also want 5 catties of fat, also minced very close." "Just fat?" he said, puzzled. "But why would you want..." Then he shrugged and smiled again. "Whatever you say, young master. 5 catties of minced fat it is." Once again he labored diligently for 20 minutes, carefully slicing off greasy lengths of white fat from the tea-colored meat, then dressing it until a mound of creamy lard was ready. By the time he had finished, his thinning hair was soaked with sweat, and he was breathing heavily. Liang, it was clear, was no longer used to working in his own shop. "Now, sir," he said, bringing out 2 more wrapped packages, "here is your second order. The total comes to..." Again, I interrupted him. "I also want 2 catties of minced tendon, not a speck of meat in it, mind." "Minced tendon?" He goggled at me, his face turning a deeper shade of puce. "Minced tendon? Who could want minced tendon?" "Do you want my order or not, you insolent dog?" I shouted. "Are you playing the fool with me, boy?" he roared. In reply, I threw the packets of mince at his head, the wrapping breaking open and spraying the meat onto the dusty pavement. "If you don't want my business, you fat pig fucker, you can keep your poxy meat." With this, I turned and sauntered away. The butcher gave out another roar and began to chase after me. At the last moment, I spun around and swung my fist in a wide arc, smashing it into his nose, which produced a crackling sound and immediately began to gush blood. Liang gaped at me for a moment, clutching his nose, then turned and began to waddle back towards the stall. "I'll teach you, insolent puppy," I heard him mutter. "I'll teach you to make a fool of Butcher Liang." He swept up the cleaver from the chopping block, then turned and advanced on me. But fortune seemed to be with me. Liang stumbled on the stairs leading down to the street, and before he had recovered, I was upon him, tripping him up and giving him a blow to the side of the head as he fell. Once down, he remained prostrate, blood and snot coating his face, his mouth agape. I gave him a few kicks, but this failed to revive him, and I noticed that his eyes had rolled into the back of his head, only the whites showing. "Get up and fight, you great fat cheat," I said, now a little alarmed. A crowd had gathered round. Could I have killed him with one blow? Granted, I am large and exceptionally strong, but to die after such a light tap on the head seemed most unreasonable. "He tried to cheat me, the bastard," I shouted out, "and now he won't even fight. He is playing dead, and that after coming after me with his cleaver." There were a few murmurs of, "Serves him right," but most of the onlookers just stood there, alternately gaping at me and the butcher's prostrate form. Then I saw several men coming from the back of the butcher's shop. They were carrying cleavers. So rather than discover whether they intended to use them on me, there seemed a certain porcine family resemblance to Liang. I began to move sideways, muttering all the while. Cheating butcher, overcharged all his customers, his meat rancid, his scale notoriously overweight, just like him, the fat bastard. I continued in this vein until I managed to slide into the crowd, down the side alley, to where Confucius was tethered, and then away. It was an absurd thing to do, of course. I was very young then, though. I thought of myself as a kind of wandering knight, righting wrongs, saving damsels in distress, the usual thing. Some such gestures came out of generosity or compassion, I suppose, but others I did out of sheer foolishness and ignorance, things that are enough to freeze my blood just thinking about them. So close to death, so often, I all unknowing. I fled the city, leaving by the west gate. I could hardly take the drum tower gate on the east side. Once outside, I abruptly decided to head for the Honan Mountains in Shantung, where I planned to seek out Master Ku, a famous Taoist sage and teacher who was supposed to live in the vicinity of Mount Tai, most sacred of the 5 March months. After 4 days, I fell in with a group of travelers going in the same direction, as is common on the road. They seemed a commonplace set of men to me. Not wealthy, that was easy to see by their clothes, which were old, patched, and made of the roughest hemp, but otherwise undistinguished, except that all of them were mounted, which argued a wealth that contradicted their shabby attire. They had a certain studied vagueness about their destination, their homes, their professions, in fact, a disinclination to answer questions at all. But I was oblivious, eager to talk about myself and to tell them of my exploits. On the first night, we made camp in the lee of a rocky overhang and huddled around a large fire, for though it was late spring, the mist that rolled in at night was cold and dank. They shared their food with me, a little rice sprinkled with small pieces of salted fish, and questioned me in detail about my family, where I was going, and so on. Questioned me, in fact, with such insistence that had I not been tired from the long day's ride, even I would have taken note. The next morning, when I returned with water from a nearby stream, they were huddled together listening as Huang, a rat-like fellow who appeared to be their leader, small with darting eyes, sharp nose, and a silky little mustache, talked intensely. The group dispersed as I walked towards the horses, most of them regarding me with such open speculation that I finally became uneasy. Still, there was little I could do short of jumping on my horse and riding away, and as they appeared to know the trails intimately, there wasn't much point in trying that. After we set off at a measured walk, the paths were still deep in mud from the spring rains, and progress was very slow. My fears dissipated, and I was soon chatting amiably about horses, a subject on which every man has an opinion, with a gaunt individual named Liu, who reminded me vaguely of Pig Boy. The sun soon burnt off the remaining mist, and a glorious clear day dawned. The sky a single sheet of cobalt stretching above the mountains, a light breeze blowing up the scent of wet earth from the valley into which we were descending, while orange, crimson, and yellow trails of wildflowers blazed through the purple bracken that covered the slopes on either side of us, and orioles fluttered like a cloud of golden butterflies through a stand of tall pines on a distant ridge, their cheerful call, "Wei, wei, wei liao," floating down to us. As we neared the mouth of the valley, a small party of travelers on foot appeared around a corner. When they were 100 paces or so away, Huang gave a sign of some sort, and all 15 men suddenly swarmed forward. For a few confused moments, with the horses milling and rearing, and a few muffled cries emerging from the melee, I couldn't see what was happening. Then a lane opened, and I saw that there were 4 bodies lying in the mud. Several of their cloth bundles had broken open, and bits of clothing and a few cooking pots were scattered about. I watched in disbelief as 3 of my companions dismounted and began to search the bodies and baggage for valuables, tearing rings off the fingers of one middle-aged woman, ripping open the blouse of a young girl to reveal budding breasts, now smeared with blood from the gaping wound in her throat.
"Definitely fuckable," one of the searchers called out. "This one you should have kept alive for a few days at least."
Huang was squatting next to one of the bodies, a man who had died from a massive blow to the side of his head and a sword thrust under the ribs. Pushing the corpse round so that the wound gaped open, Huang dabbled his fingers in the cut, then turned and walked towards me.
And that was episode 15 of A Floating Life, The Adventures of Li Bai, written by Simon Elegant, narrated by Ian Reid, and brought to you on China Radio International. Join us next time in A Light on Literature, when a young Li Bai is abducted by bandits and kills yet another man. And if you missed anything, be sure to check out our website at www.crienglish.com and click the link for A Light on Literature.